Hello and welcome to becomingaChef.co.uk. My name is Christopher Flatt and this is my short presentation on what is yeast, the basics. So what is yeast? There are two main types of yeast. This is fresh yeast and dry yeast. Although dry yeast has several different kinds. The two main dry yeasts are regular active dry yeast and instant yeast. The main difference between these two dry yeasts is that active dry yeast has a larger particle and will need dissolving in water before being used. The instant yeast can be mixed straight into the dry mix of the dough due to its finer texture. These two dry yeasts can be used alternatively depending on the baker's own recipe needs. The standard bread recipes can vary in quality by using different types of yeast, and this can change the characteristics of the finished bread product. So an introduction to yeast. Instant yeast can be known by several different names. These include quick rise yeast, rapid rise yeast, fast rising yeast, or bread machine yeast. The instant type of yeast will have a quicker raising time for the dough. Instant yeast has a much faster raising time than the dry yeast known as active dry yeast and fresh yeast. Recipes can be altered in quality by changing the type of yeast and the amount used in the products. Instant yeast has a much faster raising time when used in breads due to the finer grains. These grains absorb the moisture quicker than the larger grains of the active dry yeast. The instant yeast creates carbon dioxide from the sugars and starch in the dough. It's this carbon dioxide that creates the bubbles that cause the dough to stretch and expand. So about active dry yeast. Active dry yeast has a larger grain size than the instant dry yeast. It is crucial that the active dry yeast is proofed in water before being used due to the larger size. So it can't be just added straight to the dry mix like the instant dry yeast. So the various brands of active dry yeast will have their own advice on water temperature for the proofing of the yeast, but usually the temperature will be around 36 to 46 degrees Celsius. Active dry yeast can be stored at room temperature for up to a year. The yeast can be frozen in its sealed packet, and you can also, when yeast is frozen in its sealed packet, you can use it directly from the freezer. When you have opened a packet of active dry yeast, it will have a shorter shelf life by up to 50% of an unopened packet. The yeast will lose its power if stored at room temperature in an unsealed packet. So dry yeast can be exchanged for instant yeast or bread machine yeast. The same quantities can be used if exchanging the two types of dry yeast. About instant yeast. A good choice of yeast to use in bread machines is the easiest yeast to use, and it can be mixed straight into the dry ingredients. It does not need to be mixed in warm water first. Instant dry yeast has finer granules, and the liquid, but when making your bread product, the liquid part of the dough recipe should be warmed to around 48 to 55 degrees Celsius. And a typical recipe for using instant yeast, you'll use one packet of the instant dry. About fresh yeast. Fresh yeast can also be known as cake yeast, wet yeast, and fresh yeast or compressed yeast. It has been used by bakers for many years and is still used today. However, fresh yeast is a lot harder to find and will be found mainly in specialty stores. Due to the limited availability of fresh yeast, many bakers use dry yeast in their baking instead of using the fresh yeast. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation about yeast. If you've got any questions, please leave it in the comments below. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and please give this video a like. Thank you very much.